Good evening. How do you do? Today we have a number of Vancouver Canucks related trade notes and draft notes to dive into today. We have a number of conversations to have about Jake DeBrusk, teams that are linked to him, that could be knocking on Vancouver's door trying to acquire him. We've got the latest on Elias Pettersson and whether or not Vancouver would actually be interested in retaining salary on a PD trade. And then we have the roadblock. Caleb Malhotra has been linked to the Vancouver Canucks in more lists than one, but it seems like now it's not looking as likely as it was maybe a week or two ago. Let's start out with the trade updates in regards to Jake DeBrusk and EP40. It comes to us courtesy of an article posted by David Pagnotta on the fourth period yesterday. June 18th, 2026. The Canucks are listening on DeBrusk and PD. Now, I know what you may be thinking, Lego, that's not new news. Pettersson and DeBrusk's name being tossed out there in trade talks, didn't y'all just talk about that yesterday? Yeah, we did. We made the video speaking about Aaron Portzlin's commentary that DeBrusk could go over to Columbus for the 14th overall pick. We also made the video about Pierre LeBrun's update regarding Pettersson as well as Brock Besser. Three forwards, all potentially on the trade block, but now we have some more word as to what's actually going on, courtesy of David Pagnotta. Link to this article is going to be in the description. It is no secret that Jake DeBrusk wants no part of a rebuild and is open to a change of scenery. He has made that abundantly clear to the organization, and while a formal trade demand hasn't been made, both parties are on the same page, and Ryan Johnson has received calls about the 29-year-old since taking over. DeBrusk is entering the third season of a 7-year, $38.5 million contract. He owns a full no-movement clause and has a significant say in where he will end up once dealt. There is believed to be interest in DeBrusk from several teams, including the Ottawa Senators, Seattle Kraken, Winnipeg Jets, and Columbus Blue Jackets, and trade discussions are expected to intensify in the days leading up to next week's NHL Draft. So we had already made videos about CBJ as well as Ottawa, but Seattle and Winnipeg are two new ones. If you're thinking about each of these teams, you're trying to keep score, I'd say the Winnipeg Jets, they probably should be the better of those four teams, but it's going to be a stretch depending on what happens with Connor Hellebuck, right? If that guy ends up leaving, then, oh boy, I don't know how good Winnipeg is going to be over the next few years. Seattle makes sense as well, the idea that they need some more scoring down the wing. I mean, the Kraken have just been a really mid team. There hasn't really been that explosion that we were waiting to see after they made the playoffs all those years ago. They've just been kind of hovering around no man's land. And honestly, I don't think Jake DeBrusk is the guy who's going to go over to Seattle and take them out and into the promised land. Like, DeBrusk is a very good complementary piece. He can get 40 to 50 points a year, but if you're relying on him to be a number one dude, I just don't know if he provides what you need a number one dude to provide. Now, I understand the Kraken have a number of other pieces that would probably be over Jake DeBrusk if you're looking at it from a hierarchy point of view, but I guess for the Seattle Kraken, they're thinking about quantity, not quality, right? That's a terrible way to describe an NHL team, but I think it's the proper way to describe Seattle. Columbus, Ottawa, these are two teams that we've already made videos about. You can check those out there on the YouTube channel. The Columbus one, I still subscribe to the idea that the 14th overall pick, if Vancouver has that available to them, they should be all over that if it means getting Jake DeBrusk off the team. Beyond DeBrusk, the Canucks have multiple pieces they are willing to take calls on, but none would steal the spotlight if a trade were to occur more than center Elias Pettersson. The 27-year-old's name has resurfaced in the trade market more consistently lately, and there is a growing belief across the NHL that Vancouver's firm stance against retaining on Pettersson's contract has somewhat softened. That's not to say the Canucks are willing to eat a big chunk of his $11.6 million AAV, but if that number drops to $8.6 million, does that help push a trade across the finish line? Daniel and Henrik Sedin, and the Canucks want to work with Pettersson to get him back on track, and that would certainly prop up his trade value, which is far from high at the moment. But some teams are poking around again, and Ryan Johnson will listen. In an ideal world, if a Pettersson trade is consummated, the Canucks retain $0. That would mean they're taking back a contract or two with lesser term to help offset the finances in the short run. A move isn't imminent on Pettersson or DeBrusk at the time of this piece being published, but talks will continue leading into the draft weekend and beyond, and the full-on rebuild in Vancouver will maintain its course. So that's a really interesting piece of knowledge as well. EP40, Mr. 11.6, how about Mr. 8.6? This has always been a sticking point in the Pettersson trade discourse. Man, the guy's contract is huge. This is a guy that nobody's going to want to trade for. Now, I understand that there are caveats to that. We made a video just a few days ago talking about Nico Hischier and the fact that he could potentially be getting, $13 million-ish on his next contract. That's going to be very helpful for Elias Pettersson in softening the blow on how bad his contract's reputation is. If Nico Hischier, of all guys, can get $13 million, then Elias Pettersson at 11.6 is not that bad. Now, I'm having a pretty difficult time here actually trying to find that video. It was from a while ago. Let's just Control F here. Hischier. Okay, no, that's not it. There it is, on the right side. Elias Pettersson, potentially getting a big favor done to him from Nico Hischier and the Devils. But hearing now that supposedly maybe $3 million retained is okay for Vancouver, I'm sitting here thinking, man, the contract goes on till 2032. If the Vancouver Canucks are interested in retaining, then they have to be very, very sure that Pettersson doesn't get bought out at some point. Because if you're retaining till 2032, the contract gets bought out. Depending on when the contract is bought out and that distance, the time it takes for that contract to expire doubles, then Vancouver could be holding on to Pettersson and whatever dollar amount for potentially a decade if they're unlucky. Anyways, we don't need to think about that at this point. Let's just hope the Elias Pettersson trade gets done and there is no salary retention. If Vancouver takes on a bad contract, then I'd be okay with that. Just don't put the power into screwing Vancouver's cap picture into the hands of somebody else. And that's assuming Pettersson is bad enough to even get bought out. I don't know. We're talking about Jesperi Kotkaniemi getting bought out. Pettersson could be in the same boat. Who really knows? I'm just thinking about worst case scenario if Vancouver does retain and some other team thinks that they don't really like the new player they acquired. Speaking about acquiring centers, let's finish this video off by talking about Caleb Malhotra and the latest out of him and his situation. Here's what Cam Robinson said on the Called Up podcast earlier this week. There is now pushback on Caleb Malhotra at 3rd overall. Caleb might want to chart his own path, away from his dad, Manny. Now that is really interesting. It's not just me, it's not just some of you who are thinking about the Malhotra father-son dynamic as a weird thing. Potentially, Caleb thinks it's weird too. Now, I can understand you're saying, oh, well, that's not exactly the same thing as wanting to chart his own path. I'm not saying it is, but you can see the relation there, right? If Caleb Malhotra is subconsciously in the back of his brain thinking, man, I'd rather be in an organization that doesn't have my dad in it. I want to prove myself on my own merit. I don't want my dad to be providing the stepping stones for me to become an NHL star. It's just too weird. Yeah, that makes total sense. So for Caleb Malhotra, maybe he does not want to come to Vancouver. Maybe. There are some other notes here. Patrick Allvin, who is no longer with the Canucks, he's with Seattle. That guy was really high on Chase Reed. Todd Harvey, Vancouver's current director of amateur scouting, loves Keaton Verhoff, which checks out with all the other information we had been reading over the past few months. And then Cam Robinson says he thinks there's a world where Carson Carrolls goes 3rd overall to the Vancouver Canucks. All options are on the table. So, yeah, Carrolls to Vancouver? That'd be interesting. Do they need another left-handed defenseman? I do not know. I mean, as much as I do like the idea of William Carrolls and Elias Pettersson, I don't know if that's necessarily the guy Vancouver should be taking. But anyways, you can let me know your thoughts in the comments. How do you feel about the Jake DeBrusk trade update? We got a bunch of teams involved. Pettersson, retaining salary, seems to actually be an option. And whether or not Caleb Malhotra pushing back at third overall is a good thing, in your opinion. How do you feel about all these Canucks notes? Let me know in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sign on, and bye.